1 minute to showtime.
We do the public hearing first?
Yeah, we'll follow the script.
It's 7.
It's 7?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good evening, everybody. Seeing now that, got a call to order, the Committee of Infrastructure. The Committee of Infrastructure, this meeting is held on Wednesday, September 25th, 2024, and it convened at 7 p.m. in the automatic chamber and duly noticed in 2 places, including the city's website, in accordance with the requirements of RSA 91-8A semicolon 2, Roman numeral 2. Can the clerk please take a roll?
I will do that, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Chris Thibodeau.
Here.
Alderman John Sullivan. Alderman Patricia Klee, I'm here. Alderman Richard Dowd.
Present.
And Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien. Senior.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have 4 members.
Thank you. I declare quorum. With us this evening, in addition, that will be perhaps maybe speaking, Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director, Liz Hannon, which is, what's the term? Economic Development
Director.
And also watching us in the back row is Mr. Cummings, So,
Heidi.
and I think that's it. So without further ado, we'll carry it on. We have before us, we're going to take up the public hearing first, which is a petition for street discontinuance, a portion of Veterans Memorial Parkway, the right of way. And at this time, those that want to speak on it, you're welcome to come up to the microphone. You'll give your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes. Unfortunately, I know it's kind of tight,
Oh, no.
but only 3 minutes.
No, public hearing.
Not for a
Which
public
one is
hearing.
that one? Public hearing.
Excuse me,
public
that's right, too. It's a public hearing. You do have a little bit more leeway on that. But please, when you start making your point, no need to repeat. Yeah. I would consider it a favor. Okay. So I will call up twice, testimony in favor and testimony in opposition. So therefore, I first will call testimony in favor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Brad Westgate. I'm a lawyer with Weiner & Bennett, 402 Amherst Street here in Nashua. I represent Blaylock Holdings LLC, which is the petitioner on this petition for street discontinuance. Michael Devon of Thorndike Development is also with me. I will be brief and try to be succinct, Mr. Chairman. As you'll recall, this is pertaining to the Mohawk Tannery redevelopment. The petition pertains to 4.42 acres of the right-of-way of Veterans Memorial Parkway. It doesn't have anything to do with the paved surface itself, of course, but the right-of-way in the shoulder area. As you go into the parkway from Broad Street, it's generally in the area where there's now, I'll call it the statue or the little sculpture that has been put up. That gives you at least some orientation of it. So the Board of Aldermen has already approved a purchase and sale agreement by which Blaylock would buy this 4.42 acres from the city when certain conditions were made. The Board of Aldermen has also approved a master development agreement for this project, which contemplates that this part of the right-of-way, this 4.42 acres, be an integrated whole in the project site. And what this does is this land provides access to the site off the Veterans Memorial Parkway, which of course, as the board is well aware, is the way into enabling this development to occur. It also provides support for significant infrastructure, and some of the land will actually be used for the sites of part of the multifamily buildings that are contemplated. The petition is a sort of corollary aspect of the process to enable the city to sell the property. The idea being that when the property is sold and closed with Blaylock, the public servitudes that's created when a street is laid out no longer would be in effect, and therefore the land effectively freed up for Blaylock to be able to undertake the remediation and then the ultimate redevelopment. When we initially drafted this petition, which actually went back some time, it was written on paragraph 14 to the effect that it would be effective upon completion of the remediation. But as the circumstances have developed, we need to make an amendment to that time, the effectiveness of the petition. And rather than it being effective upon the remediation being completed, we would respectfully propose to amend it to enable the petition to be effective upon the closing with Blaylock. So, yes, you can get a little bit of a sense of
I'm just
that.
trying to see where it is. I apologize. Am I in the area?
Yeah, if you go up to the left a bit more,
Yeah.
kind of right, yeah, a little more to the left, sort of see where I think it, I'm sorry, I'm not
Right through
reading
here?
either. Yeah, the words Mine Falls Park. Yeah, go a little more left and then to the, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right where you were circling, right where the dots are circling is
Right
essentially
there?
that,
Okay.
that piece of land, exactly.
I gotta just wait for it to load. Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Nice.
It's right here?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly right. So it's right there. So as I was saying, we drafted the petition contemplating it would be effective when the remediation was done. But as I was saying, as time has, and the events have played out, we need to amend the petition, and I brought a proposed text for an amendment to two of the paragraphs that effectively make the petition effective upon the closing with Blaylock. You may remember when the full board approved the abatement for real estate taxes, that was, for those back taxes, that was made effective upon closing. So the idea here would be just like that with the tax abatement petition, or resolution, I should say. That is, assuming Blaylock closes, then of course the abatement of taxes would be go into effect, and the discontinuance would go into effect. And by closing, I mean acquisition, taking title to this 4.42 acres, which would be at the same time Blaylock took title to all the rest of the project site, the Mohawk piece, the Fimble piece, and a small piece of Tamposi-owned property. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I could just hand out the replacement paragraphs or the edits to the paragraphs that I've contemplated, and we would respectfully ask that the committee provide a favorable recommendation to the full board for the amended petition.
Absolutely, thank you.
To keep it simple, I only am passing out the page that has the red-lined edits that we've proposed.
Mr. Sullivan, have you had an opportunity to look at this document?
I think it would be Director Cummings.
Or Director Cummings?
Yes, we have had an opportunity to review it. We reviewed it as a group, yes.
Why don't you, Counselor, you may have a seat. Why don't you have a seat?
Okay, thank you.
And Director Cummings, do you want to step forward? You look lonely back there. Thank you, Ernie.
Are there two copies? If not, I'll make a copy.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So for the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services. What we are about to continue the discussion on is an amendment in hand that I believe Alderman Jettie has passed around, is a piece of language that we needed to insert into the document this evening to make it more clear or accurate based upon some additional research that Attorney Westgate did. This language has been developed in unison with Engineer Hudson and has been signed off upon by Deputy Corporation Counsel Leonard. And we've all had an opportunity to look at it and would recommend it to you.
Okay. Are you all set, Counselor?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I will open up now questions on this matter to the board. Alderman Clay?
I'm going to Alderman Dow first. if you don't
Alderman
mind.
Dow?
Okay, so these are clarifying questions relative to the public hearing.
Right.
Okay, then I do have a clarifying question, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Just so that I do understand that the information that's put forward here is similar to that we did for the previous type thing, the upon closing and so on, and you said that this was already going to be placed into the contract and only needs to be approved by the Board of Aldermen, correct? That's what this amendment is here. Am I understanding that correctly, Director Cummings?
Attorney Westgate, do you want to?
My understanding is that if this committee approves the the proposed edit, then when it goes back to the full Board of Aldermen, it would go back to the full board as edited with the language effective upon closing rather than effective upon remediation completion for the full board to then consider and vote on yes or no.
Okay, then I do have I don't know if this would be considered a clarifying question or if it's a point of order. May I ask that question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Will we then need another public hearing? No?
My understanding is no,
No,
but I
okay.
would obviously defer to Corporation Counsel's ultimate determination on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I just wanted to
it's-
make sure that we get that
Yeah.
out on the open, so.
All set, Alderman Clay?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Alderman Dow?
Yeah, I don't think we're changing the context of what we're talking about tonight, and when we get to the other portion of the hearing, and we take this up, we would have to make a motion to amend this page as presented, and present that to the board as an amended resolution.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. The chair does have a question. I am good with this amendment, but it's got to have access off the current parkway, correct?
Yes, the project fundamentally needs its direct access off Veterans Memorial Parkway,
Then
absolutely.
it lead into, is it going to be the need of traffic assistance, devices such as a light or something? And if that is the case, who is responsible?
So in the planning board process, and the board may recall that earlier this year, late spring, the planning board approved various subdivision plans, but primarily the site plan for the project. That contemplates signalization, traffic light, to be paid for by the developer. And the phasing in of when it occurs is a bit of a detail to be worked out engineering-wise. In other words, at some point, the traffic level will be needed for the light to occur, but that's a function of the development and the build-out, if you will.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Director Cummings, please.
Yes, so relative to this project, it is anticipated that this intersection at some point will need some sort of traffic light and to help mitigate the throughput of the vehicles. But as Attorney Westgate indicated, we're not exactly sure when. Because we don't want to necessarily do it until it's necessary. And so as the development comes about over this, 5 to 10 year horizon, at some point you will see the traffic light. And the good news is through the good leadership of Director Sullivan, the site plan was developed in a way that took into consideration all these design concepts. And so we will have the site designed and planned for so we can accommodate the infrastructure improvement when necessary.
Right. Well, it seems to be like, thank you, Director Cummings, and I'm probably putting the horse before the carrot here on this one. But beside a traffic light, I could see even moving the street light, and some of the street lights we have there are aesthetic, so you want to keep the uniformity, consistency. You know, I do like to have lighted intersections, you know, and particularly when something's named a parkway, just thinking of the safety. It's a discussion that I hope we can keep in our shirt pocket.
Absolutely, Mr.
These are
Chairman.
Obie's concerns, and
Absolutely.
we'll work on it in the future. Okay, further questions from the board? Okay, thank you, Mr. Counselor.
Thank you very much,
Attorney
Mr.
Wingate.
Chairman.
Director Cummings, you want to sit right there?
I'll be happy to. Now that I'm here for the evening.
Well, I'll tell you, the seating is so much better here. Very comfortable, yes.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else with testimony in favor? Okay, we're going to move on. Testimony in opposition. Call again. Testimony in opposition? Nobody stepping forward? Testimony in favor? Mr. Wingate, you came up, so you don't need to come up again. Anybody else? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to testimony in opposition. Seeing none, then I will close the public hearing on the petition for street discontinuance. Was declared closed at 7:16. Now, Director Cummings, help me, and Alderman Dowd, help me with the final part. This amendment, do we need to take a vote for this committee on this particular?
As recommended.
Okay, so therefore, without objection, for material that was supplied to us prior to the makeup of the agenda.
Do we want to do that at the next meeting? We haven't opened up the next meeting yet.
No, well, okay. You want to do it in the main meeting? It
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
we'll open up the,
All right.
let's open up the next meeting, yeah.
Okay, what did I say, 7:16?
So we open up the next meeting at 7:17?
You've adjourned from this?
Yeah, because he closed the
Yes, he
public
called the
hearing.
adjournment.
I closed the public hearing.
Yeah,
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll take it up.
the next meeting.
We could put it at the first order of business.
Yes.
I'm liberal to that.
After the roll call.
Yeah. Everybody's still here, right? We haven't lost it. Everybody's still here?
And awake. And awake.
And awake? Yeah, okay, yes. Public comment on anything that is going to be discussed on tonight's agenda. Again, give your name, address, and this one, you get the 3 minutes. Okay? So you're welcome to come up. Attorney, welcome.
And before Attorney Westgate begins, I just want to make it clear so we all understand that we exited the public hearing. We have now begun the Committee on Infrastructure's regularly scheduled meeting. I believe I heard the clerk say that started at 7:18 this evening. And I believe, Mr. Chairman, we are now have conducted roll call.
Yes,
And we are going into public comment.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening,
Sure,
Mr.
yes.
Chairman, members of the board. Again, for the record, my name is Brad Westgate, lawyer with Weiner and Bennett, 402 Amherst Street in Nashua. I will speak briefly on 4 items and compress them all into the 3 minutes. The 4 items before you that pertain to the tannery this evening are, 1, the petition for street discontinuance, which you've already had your public hearing on, and as noted, we respectfully request that the committee provide a favorable recommendation for passage to the full Board of Aldermen with the amendment proposed. There are 3 other items, 3 different proposed resolutions. One of them, R-24086, that pertains to a release of a portion of the city's existing trunk line sewer easement. Make a very long story short, One of the lots in the project is the so-called containment cell lot. This is where the hazardous materials are to be assembled and put in that secured containment cell that the board has heard about. Part of the land mass that's in that lot is in the city's sewer trunk line easement. But this extra part of the sewer easement was outside of really where the normal sewer line runs. It's sort of a bump-out area that I gather was created initially because of construction needs. So we had proposed a resolution we worked on with city staff, including Mr. Cummings, of course, and Mr. Hudson, Attorney Leonard, Mr. Sullivan, to propose that it be released because we need it released. Otherwise, the containment cell land can't extend into that area, and it needs to extend into that area to be functional. R 24087 is a resolution to authorize the sale of the 4.42 acres we've been talking about as surplus property. It's somewhat of a technicality because the Board of Aldermen has already approved the purchase and sale agreement for it, but the determination of surplus was sort of an essential to make that underpinning for the purchase and sale agreement in place. And the last one is R 24088. This pertains to an incremental payment mechanism for the sewer connection fees. Because of the size of the project, approximately 546 units being contemplated, we've been working with city staff on a mechanism to allow incremental payment of the sewer connection fees, because they're a substantial amount. The current ordinance for that governs the sewer connection fees and sewer tie-ins generally calls for a one-time assessment to be paid when you seek a sewer tie-in permit for the entire system. So what we have proposed is that we file an application for all 546 units. It's going to be commensurate with the application that's already been submitted to New Hampshire DES for tying into the municipal system. And then on a building-by-building basis, we file specific supplemental permits, if you will, and pay for each building in whole for that building as we seek that supplemental permit.
Time.
Thank you, and I
Sorry.
appreciate your consideration on these
Yeah,
resolutions.
I'll let you a little leeway if you want to continue your thought.
All I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, was that this mechanism will allow this incremental payment of the sewer tie-in fees. It'll also allow the issuance of these supplemental permits under the kind of umbrella overview permit we've created. And obviously, we have to pay those fees in order to keep that arrangement in place. And again, we'd seek favorable recommendations on all three resolutions. And as you're talking about them, if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them if you so desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Anybody else would like to speak?
Alderman Dowd.
Public comment.
Alderman Dowd has a question.
Alderman Dowd,
Now
yes.
that public comment is completed, and before Director Sullivan brings the train into the station, I'd like to make a motion to modify the petition for street discontinuance as submitted by Blaylock on Veterans Memorial Parkway and replace page 2 with the red line markings when it goes before the full board.
Okay, as I can see, and I agree, Alderman Dowd, thank you. I'm going to rely on your expertise. I see by the agenda, we were expecting something, and, but would it need to go to a second reading to go to the full board, or we're all set?
This would be a recommendation that would go to the full board for final passage. So a recommendation, so
we
the
could do
motion
it
would
just
be
on the
as
one
amended,
vote.
Would be as amended, yeah.
recommended it as amended, so it can go to the full board.
Very good. Okay, so the clerk have that?
Yeah, we have it as the communications. This is the communications from, no, this isn't the communications from Mr. Durfee, is it? I don't think it is. No, this is not the communication from Mr. Durfee. Okay, so I'm just going to put on that this is the communications that came after the agenda to be recommended, to be forwarded on to the full Board of Aldermen? Is that what we're just going to say?
for final passage.
Okay. Recommend for final passage.
And you may want to technically accept the communication.
Yeah, so that's what we want to do first, accept, yeah.
Okay.
So
Uh,
what I'm gonna write here is, if the chairman is okay, there'd be no objection, Chairman O'Brien accepted the communication, accepted the communication and and the board, the committee recommended final passage
Yes.
to the Board of Aldermen?
so
Is
you-
that okay?
As
First, the
amended.
first item of business is the chairman has accepted the communication that was provided after the agenda was prepared, unless
Okay.
there's any further objection, which I don't hear any. And then, the motion is to modify the petition for street discontinuance
Okay.
as I stated.
One moment. O'Brien, accepted. I'm sorry, my secretary days are gone.
No, my
Accepted.
clerk is the best.
Accepted the communication. Okay, recommended, if you would be so kind to repeat, recommended. You
Oh,
said-
the motion?
Chairman, yeah, your
I
motion.
recommend that the petition for street discontinuance as presented by Blaylock on the Veterans Memorial Parkway, and that we replace page 2 with the red line markups as was presented in that communication we just accepted, and
Continues.
send it to the full board as the amendment.
And we'll give you a minute to catch up here, so
Okay,
no scribbling.
just continues with the red line markup.
I know I can talk faster than you can write.
Yes, you can. So can I, but recommended that the street petition of street discontinues with the red line markup as provided. Recommended the petition street continues with the red line markup as provided for final passage. Don will hear what we have to say. To the board. Okay,
All set?
yep.
Okay. I will now, any further discussion on said amendment? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of recommending final passage to the full board signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
Thank you all. We just kept legal very content, I hope. Okay, communications.
Nope, we have to do.
No,
we have to have.
Discussion.
We have to have the discussion, and we have to have Director,
Okay, you want the discussion? Okay.
because we have to have the,
Are you all set, Mr. Sullivan?
Director Sullivan is happy to join.
Why don't you please come up and join us? While you're doing that, I will introduce you.
Can I bring the team as well?
No.
Oh, no, oh, no.
Ms. Hannon, we're always happy to see you.
We have a blanket here.
Yeah, I'll sit in the middle.
Case you're chewy.
Thanks.
She wants to go to Prague and get the,
Yeah, I tried.
Okay, can you, for the record, Mr. Sullivan, recognize the team and we'll put it on the tape, you know?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director, joined this evening by Liz Hannum, the city's Economic Development Director, and Jay Doyle, who is the primary representative of the city's consultant on the commuter rail exploration project for AECom. I'll just mention for the record, and we'll get into more detail on this evening, the AECom previously served as a consultant to the New Hampshire Department of Transportation as part of their work on commuter rail expansion for Nashua and Manchester 2 to 3 to 4 years ago. We first want to thank the committee, of course, for the opportunity to present. This is what I would refer to and characterize as a check-in presentation and an update. I was looking back about a year ago, in fact, we came before the Board of Aldermen and subsequently to the Finance Committee to actually bring forward the idea of what we're calling now, but perhaps will change in the future, of a Nashua First commuter rail expansion project. I believe that Jay will go into a little bit more detail as we get into the presentation this evening, but there's significant history around this project, of course, in the state of New Hampshire, whether it was the Capital Corridor project previously or the Nashua-Manchester expansion project of the Lowell commuter line. But what we chose to explore in 2023 is a Nashua First option. That was based on conversations with the city of Manchester and their appetite at the time for completing or finishing out the DOT's work on commuter rail expansion. DOT had chosen not to proceed based on a vote of the Executive Council. The city of Nashua and the city of Manchester spoke about potentially funding to the completion of that study, but ultimately Manchester was not at that time prepared to fund that. And therefore we entered into this scope of work with AECOM, with the support of the Board of Aldermen, to do what I'm going to refer to tonight as Step 1, Task 1. We're going to use these terms several times throughout the evening, so I want to be really clear about the difference between Step 1, Task 1 and Step 1, Task 2. Jay Doyle and I were talking before the meeting. We wish we had titled these a little bit differently because there is some confusion, but the work that you authorized last year was Step 1, Task 1. And specifically included with that were a couple different things. Agency coordination, including coordination with the FTA, New Hampshire Department of Transportation, CSX, the owner of the majority of the rail upon which the expansion would happen. Actually, the MBTA was a critical project stakeholder that we needed to engage with, and Mass DOT. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about where we stand with those different levels of engagement and what we've been doing over the last year. But that agency engagement was a critical part of the scope of work because NHDOT had not really engaged at a full level as part of their work previously, several years prior, as part of the commuter rail expansion project. And so we were going out to those agencies over the last year to talk about the idea of this Nashua First initial operating segment that Jay will get into in just a few minutes. Also included within the initial scope of work, and again, I'll call that Task 1, Step 1, Task 1, were also some minor updates and revisiting of basic ridership understanding and basic financials of what it would look like to actually do a Nashua First option and really the viability of doing that. I want to be really clear that we did not go into any level of detail around that at this point in time, and I'll talk about that in just a second and what that might look like moving forward. But what we really wanted to understand was, could Nashua First work at a very, very high level based on some of the work that had been done through New Hampshire DOT? And then, of course, we were actually presenting some of those data to those key agencies that I mentioned before because we were really taking the temperature of them as we proceeded towards a critical decision point. And that really comes to the objectives of tonight's presentation. We believe over the course of Step 1, Task 1, that we have some sense of whether we're at a critical point that we refer to as go or no-go when we talked about it a year ago with the Board of Aldermen. We believe that we would be at this moment where we are prepared to potentially proceed into Step 1, Task 2, which I'll describe in just a second. But the reason we believe that is because we've gotten relatively positive feedback from these agencies that we've been engaged with, particularly the MBTA and subsequently the Mass DOT. They are critical project stakeholders. They would ultimately be the operator of the rail line, and that was a bit of an unknown based on the DOT work. So we're at this go, no-go moment. We want to give you an update on what the conversation has looked like after over the last year, what we've learned, what some of the remaining questions are. I do want to point out early that we have not yet engaged with CSX, and we can talk in a little more detail about why that might be. But what we'd like to build the case for this evening as we prepare for a supplemental request for funding over the coming months is we would like to enter into a contract for Step 1, Task 2. And Step 1, Task 2 includes a couple next steps that are really, really important for understanding further the viability of this project. A wholesale refreshing of the key project metrics, basically how we're going to measure success of the program and whether it will be successful. More detailed modeling of ridership and what ridership might look like based on this Nashua First build-out. More detail on capital costs, on the operations and maintenance costs, and a little more investigation of the funding sources necessary to make this project successful. And we have some slides that will show you kind of where we are on this trajectory of the project. We're still very early, but this step one, task two work that we're hoping to get authorization for over the coming months, we believe there's a case to be made for it. We have the agency's support to some extent, and we believe we need this new information around ridership and cost to really understand what the project means for the city of Nashua. Before I pass it off to Jay Doyle and also ask Liz if I've missed any gaps that I didn't mention in my quick summary, I do want to point out that our sense of the conversation with the Board of Aldermen was that really all members of the board wanted to understand whether this project was realistic, whether you fully support the project, you're in the middle, or maybe you're very questioning of whether it's a viable project. I believe we've completed a critical step on that, and we'll update you on what we've learned tonight. But we further think it's critical to complete this step one, task two work to further understand what this project looks like moving forward. But we fully understand that ultimately it will take an intense level of public-private partnership and significant funding in order to accomplish this project, most of which we hope will come through the federal government. But we're hoping to at least put ourselves in a position where if all of those stars align, we can be successful in having a project that's ready to go. So with that, I want to just ask Director Hannum if she has any information she'd like to add. But before I do that, just quickly acknowledge that we have several members of the National Rail Committee here this evening, and we're going to be presenting to the National Rail Committee an update over the coming month, ensuring that stakeholders are engaged. And I also want to just thank Director Cummings, who was a critical part of getting this project started a year ago and previous to that. We believe we've made substantial progress, and we're happy to talk about it tonight.
Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director. I will just underscore the fact that over the last year, we've figured out that we're still in a potentially go situation of the go, no go, but we will not know if we are in a go or no go situation until after step one, task two. So this next step is going to be critical in actually understanding whether or not we are able to move forward. So just wanted to underscore that piece there before we hand it over to Jay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt and Liz and Director Cummings.
Excuse me, if I may, Jay, before you get
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
Do you want to make your presentation first and then open up to questions afterwards? Would keep that
That would be
continuity, or
great.
if somebody
Yeah, I
has
think that would
something
work.
speaking?
Yes,
At the end of your presentation?
yes. And I'll try to be brief because I think the introductory comments by Matt and Liz covered some of the background I was going to cover, so that should save time at the front end. And if I moved over anything too quickly as I go through the presentation, we'll have time at the end to cycle back and answer any questions you might have. So with that, again, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for having us in. I'll get started with our agenda, what we'll cover tonight. We'll try to move through this as quickly as and thoroughly as we can. A little bit on background and purpose, talking about the infrastructure and why one of the advantages of this potential project is the infrastructure, the rail line itself is there. We'll talk a little bit about operations, how many trains per day might be operating on it, some of the assumptions that were made in the prior work, how that may change now that the MBTA is evolving towards a different operations model, ridership cost, revenue, benefits, eventually to next steps. Oops. Okay, so we know that southern New Hampshire, particularly Nashua, Manchester, are economic engine of the state with respect to metrics like home values, jobs and growth, and opportunities that are emerging as part of the Regen Valley Tech Hub. The graphic's a little hard to read, but I think the takeaway is that there's great opportunity in southern New Hampshire, both for housing, for increased housing demand that we're seeing in the region, as well as for an employment pool for the region, all of which needs transportation that's efficient and affordable. And that's what we'll be talking about in some of the next few slides that this project represents. A little bit of background. Some of that was covered already, but that New Hampshire DOT study reaches back to an original alternatives analysis that was done in 2014, and then more recently, in January of 2023, New Hampshire DOT completed the further planning and analysis, also developed a 30% level of infrastructure design and costing for what we now refer to as the full build project, which was the project that would be a 30-mile extension all the way from Lowell, Massachusetts, where the line currently terminates, all the way up to Manchester. But now what we're looking at here is a Nashua First initial operating segment. So you'll see some slides that refer to Nashua First IOS. The IOS is an initial operating segment, so that would be the first piece of what could eventually become the full build. But we're going to focus on that Nashua First IOS and all the great things that it could accomplish. What's the purpose of the Nashua First IOS? It allows a significant portion of the benefits of the project to be realized with about 1/3 of the total mileage of the infrastructure and just 2 of the stations, possibly 1, South Nashua, Crown Street, or some combination, to reap many of the benefits that were seen in the New Hampshire DOT work for the full build. A lot of those benefits, most of those benefits in terms of economic development and certainly ridership, were being seen in the 2 Nashua stations that were planned. And the current phases of our work were described by Matt. We're in step 1, task 1, which was to re-engage with agencies to take a look at all of the good work that was done by the New Hampshire DOT effort and sort of mine that work and look at, for example, what would the ridership be for just the first 2 stations, South Nashua and Crown Street? What might the cost be of just the 10-mile extension, 10 or 11-mile extension instead of the 30-mile extension, and then sort of take a judgment, sort of a high-level judgment as to whether or not the project looks like it could have the potential to pass muster with Federal Transit Administration, to compete for federal grants and such. And so as we'll see as we get into the slides a little bit further, that high-level comparison of costs and ridership is looking very encouraging. So again, here is the initial operating segment shown in map form. You can see at the lower right, the existing terminus of the MBTA Lowell commuter rail line is in downtown Lowell. It would be a 30-mile extension for the full build to go all the way up to downtown Manchester, but for the Nashua First IOS, it's really just about a 13.3-mile extension to Crown Street, and less than that, something in the order of 10 or 11 miles if it's just going to South Nashua. Track and related infrastructure, as I mentioned, there is an existing rail line there, so one of the biggest advantages of the project is it's not to construct a new rail line, it's really just to upgrade an existing rail line. So that there is good infrastructure there. It has deteriorated over the years because it's just been freight only. It's gone through some ownership changes. When CSX, a major Class 1 railroad, took over Pan Am Railways, a regional railroad, CSX is a well-capitalized major railroad, which made commitments to upgrade and maintain their line. So in terms of starting, from a good infrastructure base, there are, encouraging things happening with respect to new ownership of the line. And so the project would be looking to build upon that. So what else would the project provide? The project would need to provide a modern railroad signal system, what they call positive train control, PTC. It would upgrade existing bridges. Some assessments that were done in the earlier work with the DOT indicated that the bridges don't need to be replaced; they just need to be upgraded. It would improve existing at-grade crossings, bringing them up to current standards, and making repairs to a variety of culverts along the line. A lot of this information on this slide, I think we've already talked about. The track is currently in Class 2 condition, which is fine for sort of the light, generally light volume freight that currently uses it, just a few freight trains a week. This would need to be upgraded to FRA Class 4 and a much higher speed to handle the frequency and speeds that are needed for a reliable, efficient commuter rail system. Operational assumptions, again, we'll be looking at South Nashua with Crown Street or just South Nashua alone, and would be comparing and contrasting the costs and the ridership potential for those options. The stations would have a separate track that would enable freight trains to bypass passenger trains that are waiting in a station to allow passengers to board and alight. It is assumed that MBTA would be the operator of the service. MBTA actually contracts with a third party called Keolis currently that operates their commuter rail system for them. So the assumption is whoever's operating the MBTA commuter rail system at the time of this project, they'd be operating this extension into southern New Hampshire. And all the stations would need to be high-level platforms, not low-level, and that would be necessary to meet ADA and MBTA and other state and federal standards. We looked at, in the New Hampshire DOT work, a couple of options for the South Nashua Station, and we settled on South Nashua Station being in the vicinity or at the Pheasant Lane Mall. And then at the north end, it would be the Crown Street Station, which the city is invested in already and makes sense for more of a downtown type station environment. And as I mentioned, we're looking at the Pheasant Lane Mall option being preferred because of its TOD potential and leveraging existing infrastructure and fewer environmental impacts. These next few slides just show a plan view followed by one or more renderings, just to give you a sense of what each of the stations, South Nashua and Crown Street, would look like. So what you see here is the orientation is north is to the right. So the rail line is there at the bottom of the image, and the proposed platform is that narrow purple bar that's at the bottom of the screen. The Pheasant Lane Mall is in gray shading as background on the image, and we know that the state line is right there at the south end of the proposed station platform, and there would discussion about whether it's a shared surface parking lot or whether it's a structured parking facility is something that would need to be determined at other phases of the analysis. And you can see that there would be a proposed interface with Nashua Transit System there, where you see the bus symbol, as well as a pickup drop-off curb for kiss and ride type or Uber or taxi cabs. Here's a rendering of the South Nashua Station looking south. You got the Merrimack River on the left. You've got the Pheasant Lane Mall on the right. And the existing mall perimeter road would be used as the primary vehicular access to get to and from the station. Here's another rendering of the same station looking north. And again, you've got the station platform there on the right with the train, and the perimeter road there on the left. Moving further north to the Nashua Crown Street Station location, you can see the existing park and ride facility that the city has initiated a few years ago would be leveraged as an important initial piece of infrastructure for creating the station parking for what would be the Nashua Crown Street commuter rail stop. The CSX freight yard is there to the lower left. This station would be a center island platform, and it would have a track between the platform and the parking lot, and it would have another track on the east side of the platform, and there would be a CSX freight bypass track that would be provided to allow freight traffic to bypass trains that are stopped at the station. And it's located such that when a station, when a train is in the station, it wouldn't be able to stop south of the Crown Street grade crossing so as not to foul the Crown Street crossing with a long gate downtime that could cause traffic backup. So we've done some analysis as part of the earlier DOT work, to make sure that the station and the train in the station would not have adverse impacts on traffic at Crown Street and the other adjacent at-grade crossings. So these next two are just a couple of renderings looking at the Nashua Crown Street Station from, in this case, the perspective is looking southeast, and you've got the parking lot in the lower foreground, the proposed island platform there in more or less in the center, and the CSX rail yard off there in the upper right. And this is a sidewalk level view of the same station, again looking in a similar direction, southeastward. Train in the station on the inbound side of the platform heading towards Boston. If you're not familiar with MBTA commuter rail operations, it's all push-pull, which means the locomotive is always located at the outer end of the train, and it's pulling away from North Station in Boston, and it's pushing back towards North Station on the inbound. So that's why you see the locomotive on the north end of the train, regardless of whether it's moving inbound or outbound. So, what are some of the key station area challenges at South Nashua Station? Parking supply might need to be increased based on the initial operating segment ridership. One of the things we saw from the earlier DOT work was that South Nashua Station has a tremendous demand for ridership. And that's in part because of the high demand when you look at the number of commuter buses that are moving back and forth between southern New Hampshire and Boston and Logan Airport. A lot of that demand would, according to the earlier ridership estimates, likely move to commuter rail, as well as attracting additional other ridership. But we'd need to look at parking supply because in an initial operating segment, we could expect that the demand at South Nashua Station would be even higher than we saw in the full build, because in the full build, there was going to be a station in Manchester and there was going to be a station at Bedford Manchester Airport. Some of the riders who would have gone to those stations would likely be willing to drive a little bit further south on Route 3 and take the station either at Crown Street or South Nashua. So we need to look at parking supply. The former Sears site is the area that you saw in those earlier renderings that I showed. The concept of sharing existing parking would need to be revisited given the new ownership of the space. And so capital costs might go up with respect to the parking component if we need to do a structured parking garage instead of shared parking. But that's all to be determined. Crown Street Station, again, parking supply might need to be increased, but the good news is at Crown Street there's some flexibility. There's space to the south of the existing parking lot, which is currently, I think it was shown on the image. I'll go back to it for a second. That green area is also available for parking. So if the new ridership estimates show the demand is high enough, that green area could be potentially used for additional parking or transit-oriented development, but that's something to be discussed further with the city. Layover facility, the good news is that the Nashua First IOS would not need a new layover facility. The analysis that was done for New Hampshire DOT determined, since the train was going to be going all the way up to Manchester, it was going to need a layover facility in Manchester so that the trains could stay there overnight and be ready for their inbound movements into Boston. Currently, the trains have to deadhead all the way up to Lowell. But based on a discussion we had with the MBTA back in the spring, MBTA is going to be providing, for their own purposes, for their existing operations to Lowell, they're going to be providing a layover facility at Billerica at Iron Horse Park. And so for the Nashua First iOS, that Billerica Iron Horse Park layover facility would be used. It wouldn't be necessary for this project to carry the cost, the permitting, and all the other lift that would be required to site a new rail layover facility. It's difficult to site such facilities for reasons of, potential impact of noise and vibration and neighborhood concerns. So this is good news came out of those discussions with MBTA with respect to the layover facility. We could use the one in Billerica at Iron Horse Park for the Nashua First iOS. At such time as the project would ever get extended further to Manchester, the facility in Manchester would be needed, but that's would not be needed for the Nashua First iOS, and we wouldn't need to site a layover facility in Nashua. So that was a good outcome from the discussions we had with MBTA. Potential operating plan would leverage MBTA's existing schedule. At the time the New Hampshire DOT work was done, that was back in 2021, 22. MBTA's Lowell line schedule has changed since then, so would need to plug into whatever their current regional rail operating plan would be. But the important information on this slide is that it would be about a little over an hour for an inbound train from Nashua to North Station. And outbound, it would be actually just slightly quicker. So you can see those last two major bullets, one's showing you the inbound time, and the other is showing you the outbound time to both South Nashua and Crown Street. So you're in the vicinity of, something just a little bit over an hour, which when you compare that to drive time in the worst of the peak hours, it's pretty competitive. Costs and revenues. The full build all the way to Manchester was roughly a $600 million capital cost in 2022 dollars. We think that for just 13.3 miles, which is just a little over a third of the distance of going all the way to Manchester, a Nashua First iOS would be significantly less in terms of capital cost. Operations and maintenance costs, the work that was done for New Hampshire DOT showed that fare revenue would essentially cover day-to-day operations. Once the infrastructure was put in place, the fare revenue could cover the day-to-day operations, which is also a good finding from the prior work. But a new analysis is required to develop estimates that are specific to the iOS rather than simply prorating information that came out of the full build work that was done several years ago now. Ridership, this slide's a little hard to read, but I'll just focus on the punchline, which is that the iOS potentially provides about 57 to 69% of the full build ridership for less than 50% of the capital costs. So the good news is that most of the ridership was coming out of the Nashua stations when the work was done for the full build, and yet a lot of the costs were associated with extending the system north of Crown Street. So if you look at just a Nashua First iOS, you get the benefit of capturing most of the ridership for less than half of the cost of what was projected in the full build project. So what have we done to date? We've in step one, task one, we were to re-engage with agencies and the railroads. We did meet with New Hampshire DOT back in February. We met with the Nashua Rail Committee also back in late February. Met with MBTA Commuter Rail on a couple of occasions back in May, early May and late May. And we've been attempting to set up a meeting with CSX for some time, and we're hopeful that we'll eventually connect with them because they own the railroad north of the state line. What were the key outcomes of the work we've done to date? We identified the high-level advantages of a Nashua First phased approach rather than trying to do the whole project all the way up to Manchester at once. We reestablished the lines of communication, and we received initial favorable feedback from MBTA, commuter rail folks. And I mentioned the layover facility won't be needed as part of this project. It's being provided by MBTA and Billerica. And this would be among the MBTA's highest priority expansion projects. You know, they have their hands full financially, we know that. They're currently engaged in extending commuter rail down to what they call the South Coast Rail Project. But there is precedent for these extensions into neighboring states, and you look at the success of what's been achieved. It's been 20, 25 years at least now. MBTA extended commuter rail on their line down into Rhode Island under something called the Pilgrim Partnership, where they worked, Rhode Island DOT worked with MBTA and MassDOT and made that project happen, and it's been very successful. And so when you look at the map and you look at the potential ridership from southern New Hampshire, it's MBTA recognizes that it's a logical next step, of course, pending finding the capital funds to do the infrastructure improvements that are necessary. Project benefits, we've talked about those. Broadly speaking, it's increasing transportation access and mobility. It provides economic development and land use support. It integrates and enhances quite well the local transit systems, the RTAs. Nashua Transit would connect with the stations at both South Nashua and Crown Street, and it's a sustainable mode. And when you look at all the traffic congestion on routes 3 and 93, this would be a much more sustainable mode of transportation for getting not just into Boston, but for getting people from Greater Boston up to southern New Hampshire, because it's not just a traditional commuting market anymore. It's really a two-way market there. You've got the people who need to commute to Boston, but you've also got people in Greater Boston who want to get up to southern New Hampshire for activities, weekends. I didn't mention it, but the operating plans that we've looked at and it came out of the public process was that weekend service would be very important for people in Greater Boston who want to come up to New Hampshire, for example. And so weekend service has always been part of the plan. So what are the next steps? I won't read them. They've already been mentioned by Matt. I think they're summarized here on this slide. It's about moving into task 2 of step 1. Because even though we did a very high-level look at what the potential ridership and costs are for Nashua First iOS, they were based on what is now, an outdated ridership methodology. Those ridership numbers were developed in 2021, and that was immediately post-pandemic. And so the federal agencies that would review the potential for funding on this would require that the project use the very latest FTA, which is Federal Transit Administration, methodology for ridership, which has been updated and changed since 2021. So new numbers would need to be run using that new methodology. And a lot has also changed with respect to how strongly commuter rail ridership has come back. Back in 2020 and 2021, the MBTA was seeing only a fraction of their pre-pandemic commuter rail ridership for the obvious reasons. But commuter rail ridership system-wide on the MBTA has climbed back to now where it's in the low to mid 90% of what it was pre-pandemic, and it's still continuing to increase. And that has a lot to do with them being innovative with their fare structure, being innovative with their operations scheduling to provide service that's more in tune with what people's travel patterns are. So we'd need to update the ridership with the latest methodologies, and we'd need to update the capital costs with infrastructure specific to the Nashua iOS. And so I apologize if I went a little over on time, but didn't want to miss anything.
Alderman Dowd had his hand up first.
CXS just replaced and upgraded their rail from Nashua downtown all the way to Milford. Mm-hmm. They only run about one train, I don't know, one train a week, maybe 2. And they had a machine that did that in a relatively fast, I don't know if it was cost-effective, but it certainly looked like it. And do we know whether they are upgrading the rail between Massachusetts and Nashua already, just for their own use?
Well, yeah, what we do know is that the rail line between the current MBTA terminus in Lowell and the state line is owned by MBTA. And CSX has trackage rights to operate over it. And so when you get to the state line and north, it's owned by CSX. And we do know that when CSX was going through the process of acquiring Pan Am Railways, they had to make certain filings and commitments with the Surface Transportation Board. Several of the states, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, were involved in that process. CSX, committed, as far as the information I have, to maintaining the line we're talking about at FRA Class 2, which I believe is, it's lower than what it would need to be for commuter rail, which would be FRA Class 4. So they are maintaining the line, and they are investing in it compared to what was being done under the prior ownership, so that's good. But they're not upgrading it to levels that would support commuter rail operations.
Do you know, what's the difference between the two? I mean, it looks like...
Well, the difference between the two is roughly like 25 miles an hour compared to 79 miles an hour.
No, actually, the actual hardware, I mean...
Oh, the
same-
hardware.
Same rails?
Well, it's,
different-
well, you have to do, it has to do with how many ties are considered to be in good condition, like what is the condition of the rail itself, what is the maintenance and drainage of things like the ballast that supports the ties and the rail, the signal system. It doesn't currently, CSX doesn't need a sophisticated signal system out there to operate a few freight trains a week. To operate commuter rail at higher speeds, you'd need a sophisticated signal system. I mentioned positive train control, which is what's needed when you're operating a line at the speeds and the frequencies that commuter rail would be.
Because when they extended the line to Milford, I believe they replaced every single tie and all the rail. And they've now put the rocks along the side that you see, which I understand is structural for increased weight.
Yeah?
I don't know if they get more people going to use the train going out to
Yeah.
Milford for anything.
Well,
but-
to the extent that they're upgrading it along the lines of what you're describing, that could go towards reducing, not eliminating the extent of investment needed to get it up to commuter rail standards. But my understanding of that line is it's not a CSX main line. It's a line that, receives generally low-density service. And so railroads invest in their infrastructure
But
to
what's the excess that did
extent
the work?
to the extent it's needed to support the levels of freight they're providing. I mean, it's great. I mean, if freight traffic was to grow to the point where they were operating more trains and more frequency, and customers were demanding faster service and heavier cars, then they'd have to invest more in the line, and that could theoretically reduce the amount of investment that this project would need to do as an increment above that. But that's all encouraging, actually. The fact that CSX is making those investments, it should have some effect on what that increment is above what they're doing
Yeah,
to
the
support.
previous owner hadn't touched it in decades.
Right. Other questions?
Director Sullivan, Alderman Clee has been patiently waiting.
I
But
I was-
what you have to say germane to any of
I was
this?
just going to respond by saying to Alderman Dowd, Mr. Chair, that the maintenance work that was done on the line to Milford, and you're correct, it has very low usage. There are 1 to 2 users of that track. It was maintenance work only, as I understand it. They did not actually improve any of the systems that Jay is referring to. And I did see that work going on. In fact, I saw some work going on today on the line
Yes.
adjacent to the Mohawk Tannery site. But my understanding is that that's very much maintenance-oriented versus improvement.
They didn't put any, other than the rail and the ties, they didn't do any,
Right.
infrastructure relative to crossings and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
rail bed has been completely redone, and from what because I've seen them doing it.
Yeah,
I'll just
yeah. I think it, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say,
Tractor hand.
I think we'll find out a lot of this information in this next task, as we're kind of pricing out the new iOS model. So those kinds of things, I think, will be factor in that next task.
Yeah, and I think it underscores also the importance of meeting with CSX and finding out firsthand exactly what, they're doing, so that there's a better understanding of what is that increment above what they're already planning, what's the increment above that's needed to support commuter rail.
I do have just one brief question. In the example of law motor freight, for years, they took care of every bottle of booze ever sold at the liquor store in the state, and then lost the contract. And unfortunately, now it's delivered to the Gallagher Center, and they throw it in a tractor-trailer truck, which impedes the roads more, So that's the lead-in. The question would be, do you see an economic to go back to siding for some of these structures? Because I know we had Amazon up there at one time, and,
Yeah, I think this project probably is going to be more about workforce development than it would be about supply chain. So it would be really nice to have more freight coming through. So if we upgrade those lines, then that's a possibility as well. So that's kind of a side benefit to this
Right.
project. But this is more about helping our workforce get here or get to where they need to be. So that is the economic benefit there, rather than the actual supply chain stuff.
yeah, and I do realize we're talking apples and oranges,
Yeah.
the freight versus commuter rail. Commuter rail isn't going out to Milford, but
Right.
as it stands right
Not
now.
yet.
Not yet.
Yes.
Not yet. Alderman Clee, who's been patiently waiting, thank you.
Thank you, which is not a virtue of mine, but anyways, thank you so much. Just a couple of quick questions and a comment. When I was kind of dealing with CSX during the Main Street bumps, one of the things that I had learned a lot was something that you had mentioned about the promises made during that CSX Pan Am thing, was much of what you had already said about the FRA Class 2 kind of upgrade and the promises made and so on. And I know there was no FRA Class 4 promises made, but one of the things that I do know was that our New Hampshire delegation was very on board, and that's who I contacted to get CSX to come to the table and have discussions with us. Do you think, I know they're not going to come to us when we're doing this step 2 kind of thing, but do you think they may be beneficial in persuading CSX to kind of talk to us, or would that be a no-no in getting them to play nice with us?
That's true. So CSX has been somewhat responsive.
Right.
In a sense, it's been a matter of trying to actually coordinate time to talk to them, quite frankly. We had great response from their government relations contacts, one of which we worked on with some of the work that you did, Alderman Clay. It's literally been a matter of finding time to actually get together. And I do want Jay to stop me if I'm saying this incorrectly, but part of the lack of criticality for us when it comes to coming to this body, saying that we're in a very good place, but not having talked to CSX, which seems like a critical partner, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, MBTA has passage rights on the existing CSX line, Jay, and so while we certainly feel the need to be engaged with CSX throughout this process and talk to them about what we're doing, because they are a critical project partner, It's a very different ask than what we're asking of MBTA. We're simply making CSX aware and talking to them about where we are in the project development phase. Yes, we'd love their support, but they're not going to be a party that says yes or no right now, stopping our work and exploring this project. Is that fair to say, Jay?
That's right. That's a good way to characterize it. Just to expand on your point, it didn't. I don't think it appeared in one of the slides. If it did, I may have skipped over it too quickly. But it is one of the other important opportunities with respect to this project is those trackage rights that MBTA has and has actually had via a legal agreement with Pan Am Railways that dates back many years, that MBTA has the right to operate commuter rail over CSX's line in southern New Hampshire all the way up to Manchester and I think possibly even beyond to Concord. And that when CSX acquired Pan Am, CSX overtly stated that they would honor all agreements that Pan Am had made, including that commuter rail operating rights agreement that MBTA has. So that's another important opportunity that those trackage rights that MBTA holds are still there and can be exercised by MBTA.
Thank you. And may I just make one more comment, Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. While we're having this discussion, and so that the public doesn't panic, if we keep our conversation to commuter, I don't want my constituents and other residents thinking, oh my God, we've got all these trains coming through my backyard and everything like that, of commuter and liquid nitrogen and everything else coming through every which way. Let's keep the conversation. We've already got trains and so on. You know, sometimes it can get scary when we're talking about all these trains. And truthfully, I do have a lot of trains coming through we have them coming through Main Street, and people are going to panic that they're not going to be able to go down Main Street because there's going to be trains coming every which way. So, you know, we got excited about thinking about all these things being delivered and so on, but to keep people on track, you know.
Maybe just,
one
this is
topic at a
an
time.
opening to add a comment and underscore something that Jay said. One of the concerns about the entire project when it was contemplated as a Manchester project, or National and Manchester, was the siting of this layover facility, which would have been, I don't want to say a train yard, but functionally a train yard, right? And I know that you've dealt with some concerns about that, Alderman Clee, in your area. I can't state enough how critical it is that this layover facility is no longer necessary as part of the project, as of our understanding today. I laugh every time Jay talks about it because he's very nonchalant about it. But for me, every time I hear that, it's a big deal, and he knows it's serious.
No, it is a big deal.
And frankly, it was a bit of a surprise to us as part of our conversation with MBTA. And so, you know, that combined with the fact that this was identified as MBTA, and we asked them multiple times as this being the top priority expansion, subject to being in their capital plan and completing the other efforts, we were surprised by our conversation, quite frankly. Those two pieces are critical for understanding whether this project is viable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Further questions? Alderman Jettie.
Thank you. So, I don't want to go over stuff that you've already covered, but I still don't understand, why, and this may just be because I'm not in your field, but when you say that the MBTA has trackage rights over from the state, over CSX tracks from the state line, to Nashua, Manchester, probably even Concord, that I interpret that as meaning that they have a right to run a train over the track. I don't interpret that to mean that CSX has to provide the level of track that MBTA may want for their commuter line.
That's right.
So it's, when I hear you say, well, when you admit that, yeah, we it would have been good to talk to CSX by now. I mean, you know, when you met with the rail committee back in February, you were talking about talking to CSX, and here it is, so, you know, almost October, and you haven't talked to them yet. I don't mean to sound overly critical, it's just my ignorance, but I wonder why. It seems like, you know, if it's such a small ask to get their commitment that they would be, you know, willing to bring the track up to the necessary grade, you know, why isn't that been taken care of? And if they refuse, how is this project going to go forward?
Mr. Chair, if I may respond to Alderman Jetty's
Yes, you may.
question.
Yes, you may.
So Alderman Jetty, I think before I answer more thoroughly, there is no expectation, nor does the agreement speak to CSX being responsible for the upgrades to the track. There's simply a right to pass functionally in sort of easement terms, right? MBTA trains may pass within that trackage area, but we fully expect that the cost of the upgrades themselves will be borne by the City of Nashua and any other funders or parties to the project. And so I think it's not.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
I just want to put a more finer point on what Director Sullivan's saying. So I think, Alderman Jetty, what you're asking is relative to, does CSX need to give any type of permission for the construction to occur, no matter whom is paying for it? And the legal agreements contemplated back when the big dig was done, that when certain upgrades were made, that they, at the time, Pan Am, had to give the rights for passenger rail to occur, including any type of upgrades that were necessary. And so that was all contemplated back in legal documents back in the mid-90s, as I understand it, or late 80s, and that's essentially as to how we got to where we are right now.
And Alderman Jetty, just to respond to the timing question, it's a fair question, and it has been 7 months, I think, since we last talked about it with the Rail Committee. At that time, we were still contemplating how to engage properly with Mass DOT and the MBTA. We had not had meetings with them yet. I'd be the first one to admit that I think our wisdom changed around what the order of meetings should be internally. And so we prioritized reaching out to the MBTA and MassDOT to have their buy-in before even approaching CSX, because without MBTA's indication on the project, the CSX meeting simply may not have been effective. They would have said simply, have you talked to MBTA? And we would have said no. So we reordered the meetings, and I'll be very honest, it's been an interesting part of this project to get the right folks in the room, to feel like we're getting impactful feedback, that we can actually come back to this board and this committee and say confidently, yes, we have buy-in. They know, we can state publicly that you are agreeable to this. So, I'll say it's been tough to get the right meetings, and so it's taken more time than we anticipated. And as I said, we're still working to get that CSX meeting scheduled, but we're confident that it will be a productive discussion, particularly based on the engagement we've had with MBTA.
Okay, thanks. So could I follow up?
Follow up?
Thank you. So I just want to make sure I understand correctly. If I remember correctly, we've agreed to pay around $70,000 for this step one, task one, and now you're going to be approaching us to go to task two, which I think is close to 2 times that amount.
More. $210,000 approximately.
Okay. So about 3 times that amount. And and from what I hear you saying is that, the fact that CSX has not committed to this in whatever fashion they need to, is not a critical missing piece. I mean, I'm just thinking about my fellow aldermen, given the current atmosphere.
Yep.
Getting them to agree to pay another $210,000. We want to make sure that if we go ahead with this, that all the pieces are in place up to this point that can be, and that CSX piece just seems like a small thing. I can't imagine that they wouldn't agree, but it seems like a small thing to get them to agree so that we don't have to answer that question again.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may respond, Alderman Jay, I think it's a great question. I would say it's our goal when we come forward with the ask for supplemental funding that we would have had a meeting with CSX. And so that's sometime down the road, but yes, it's been 7 months, but I believe we can get that meeting done. We have been going back and forth with them. But what I want to manage expectations around is the idea that CSX is going to say, we love this project, we can't wait for you to proceed, you have our blessing. And the reason for that is that obviously, although this trackage right exists, this construction and upgrade work does have the potential to disrupt their operations. It will be impactful for them. And so we have very realistic expectations and think that CSX may say, we don't love your project. But the reality is that the legal right exists for the project to be carried out. And so I just want to temper expectations to say that we want to have that meeting. We want to have said we had it when we come to the board for this additional money, but that meeting may not be as supportive of the city's project as you might be hoping for, and we're trying to manage that hope ourselves. I will just say that our goal is to bring the full quiver of meetings and engagement to you when we ask for that supplemental money. We want to be able to say that we satisfied the scope of that initial contract. But I would say that even tonight, without that meeting, we feel like we have enough information to proceed on to that task 2 work. But we're going to work to try and get that meeting done.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Dow.
Yeah, 2 quick things. One, first question is, who owns the track as far as maintenance and construction from Lowell to the Nashua border? Is that MBTA?
Yes.
So they'd have to be upgrading that track. So the other thing is you were just mentioning or alluding to is, and if we replace the existing track and upgrade it, it's going to be disruptive to their freight service. And the question would be, how long would it take? The one to Milford, to me, didn't take that long, and I don't know how far that is, but with that automated machine, they seem to do it pretty quick. But the other thing to just keep in mind when you're talking to CSX and MBTA is there were always 2 rails going to Boston, going to Lowell. So there's space in that right-of-way for a second rail. Would it be cheaper to build a new rail on that space and keep CSX whole? That's something to think about, just being in the logistics like I am. It's got to be faster to do that and probably develop a better, safe rail.
Jay, I don't know the answer to that. I can't speak to the second rail.
Yeah, the prior work that was done for New Hampshire DOT, there was extensive operations modeling that was done to simulate the train operations. And as you know, the line, as you correctly pointed out, historically was double-tracked, essentially its entire length. And then as traffic declined over the years, the railroad took out the second track. What the operations analysis showed that when operating commuter rail at a frequency that you see, for example, on the Lowell line today, would require that there be passing sidings provided at strategic locations so that inbound and outbound trains could pass each other without delay. One of the reasons why the cost north of Nashua from an infrastructure standpoint is pretty high was because essentially there was an entire section, I think the last 5 miles, basically from the big Merrimack River Bridge north all the way to downtown Manchester, needed to be double-tracked to support the operations. There's less double tracking needed for the Nashua First iOS. But to your specific question, I think is, would it be better to just have a separate track for freight and passenger? Was that what you were asking?
In order not to disrupt their freight operation, especially if they're expanding it, and there's room for 2 sets of tracks, if you're going to put an upgraded track for passenger rail, bill that separately. You don't interfere with CSX
Yeah, it would still be on
It's something to look
CSX,
at, though.
it would still be on CSX property, that second track. It would
Right,
be
you
within their
wouldn't-
right
you
of
wouldn't- You
way.
wouldn't be stopping their freight trains from operating if you're
Right.
building the track next to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's what a new operations analysis would show, where the second track is needed. Because even if there was a single separate passenger-only track, there would be inbound and outbound passenger trains that at various points during the peak hour would need to pass each other, and it'd still be the need to use that other track. So you couldn't operate commuter rail entirely on a single track to and from Manchester. You'd need to have passing sidings.
I was just thinking Nashua to Lowell.
Oh, Nashua to Lowell, yeah. Yeah, that's something that would have to be looked at as part of a new operations analysis, that instead of looking at the full build all the way to Manchester, based on the MBTA schedule as it existed in 2021, it would need to be a new analysis for just a Nashua First iOS with MBTA's current operations model, and also taking into account CSX's existing freight operations, and of course, what CSX thinks their operations are going to look like in the future if they're intending to grow the volume. I mean, our understanding right now is that, their volumes are still pretty low. The number of trains per week are pretty low. And so they should be able to slot them in to the type of infrastructure that's envisioned, in the prior work, and that we would expect between Lowell and Nashua. It should be relatively straightforward to slot the CSX operations in there. The CSX operations are most busy between Lowell and the North Chelmsford connection to the CSX main line. Once you get north of that into the state line and into southern New Hampshire, the CSX, frequency of trains per week and the size of the trains is relatively small compared to the CSX main line. But we'd have to look at it. Short answer is that would need to be looked at in a new operations modeling effort.
The other thing that's always been in the back of my mind, if we do it, the step one to Nashua and it's wildly successful, guess how much pressure they'll be put on to go to Manchester quicker and Concord perhaps.
Exactly.
They say, whoa.
Exactly.
We should have got in the beginning of this thing.
Director Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So essentially, as I understand it, we've done the preliminary investigation, and preliminarily, it looks like we're trending in the right way, and we're leaning towards a go. But we need to do this second step, which is basically the build-out of a business plan, so we have a better understanding as to where we're at before the bigger question that gets asked, which is, do we want to continue with the work that's been done to bring us to a certain point in design? And that's after this next phase that we're talking about. I'm going to recommend to you that you do fund this project, so you do have this information. It's a couple $100,000 to help the city of Nashua understand truly what it would take for you to potentially achieve one of the biggest community infrastructure goals that the city of Nashua has routinely said that they had an interest in. And so you've come very far in this process. I would recommend that you continue this. And then once you get through the next iteration of this, you'll then have some good data to actually make that go, no-go type of assessment, and then really decide if you want to take on that bigger bite. So I think the work that's been done here has been tremendous to date. I'm pleasantly surprised that we got such good feedback so early on. And that just makes me very hopeful for the city of Nashua.
Good, okay, Director Cummings, will we need a vote on this presentation?
No.
To refer it back to the full board?
No, Mr. Chairman, what you will be asked at some point over the next few months is for some funding to be able to proceed with this additional work. So you can close out this study and then, go from there.
Okay. Alderman Clay, did you?
Yeah, just, if I may, just a quick question. When you say request funding from the full board, or is this something that will come through So this is non-budgeted funding, so this will be
Correct.
just something that have to come to the board with
Correct.
a two-thirds vote type of thing.
Correct.
Okay, that's all I asked. That's what I was asking for. Thank you. Thank you, Alderman.
Further questions from the committee to our esteemed guests? Seeing none, I really want to thank you, Director Sullivan, Director Ham, and Jay, for taking the time. This has been bantered about. I was a state rep for 18 years, and I blew my bugle up there, but nobody liked the tune, you know what I mean? But, and it's still going to be a tough sell in Concord, you know? But hoping that maybe with the new pending election, whoever the governor is, you know, might be a little bit more open-minded with this, you know, so we'll have to wait and see. But thank you for your presentation. I think many of the citizens who stayed up to watch this with their popcorn became very enlightened. You know, so.
I want popcorn.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien, we appreciate
Now
it.
I want popcorn.
Thank you.
Well, come on over to the house.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate it.
I made popcorn for the family, and I overfilled the pot. Oh, yeah, my granddaughter, yeah.
Alderman O'Brien, I'm sorry, in my haste, I forgot to let you know that Alderman Jettie was also here, not as a member, but as a board member, so.
Like a guest appearance, welcome,
I
Alderman
know, I
Jett.
forgot, it was
Well, he's
my,
trying to make up for all the meetings
know.
he missed.
I'm just
Trying
an
to get the
interested
quota back.
he
observer.
hasn't been here for so long, I completely didn't even see him.
Alderman Jettie, as always, welcome.
Thank you.
Wasn't until he was speaking that I realized that he was here. You have communications next.
Okay, communications. There being no we have, you want to read
Okay,
the title?
Yeah, from Sam Durfee, Planning Manager. In regards to referral from the Board of Aldermen, petition for street discontinuance, portions of Veterans Memorial Parkway right-of-way.
Okay, there being no objection, I will accept the communication and place it on file. Okay.
From
and-
Wayne,
and-
I'm sorry?
Oh, yeah, also, without objection, I will suspend the rules to allow for communications that were received after the agenda was prepared.
Sorry. From Wayne R. Husbands, P.E., Senior Traffic Engineer, in regards to Division of Public Works, support of pending legislation.
There being no objection, I will accept the communication and place it on file. Okay, now we're into unfinished business
There's none?
and a petition.
Petition, we already took care of.
Yeah, you already did that one, yeah.
Okay,
Jumped the gun on that one.
that would be good, yeah, okay. Put down, and what it is, just to remind everybody,
That was
in the
the
transcribing.
Yeah.
Who made the motion, Alderman Dow?
Alderman Dowd, and I put that in here.
Okay, you
And
put
I'm
it
just
in
gonna
there,
put- yeah,
and
I'm gonna
that
put
is to grant
Yeah,
the petition for street discontinuance,
As amended.
okay.
and as amended, yeah, and I put as amended here, and I put for Donna to see the note,
Very good.
see note.
Yeah, they listened to the tape of this, but just to make sure,
She's good
any
that way.
question, yeah, if you
They're good.
want to follow up with a phone call, that would be
I'll send her a note.
equally great. Okay, new business resolutions.
R-24-086, authorizing the release of a portion of an existing sewer easement. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend final passage?
Yes.
Yes. I say that with a question mark.
Director Cummings, you know what this is about?
Yes, this is what,
Yeah, it's what we had
what Attorney
talked about
Westgate spoke
earlier.
about.
Okay, so it's part of the,
The
The Mohawk Tannery Project,
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
okay.
We would ask that you favorably recommend this piece of
Very good.
legislation.
Yeah, you see what old age does to you, you know? Okay. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
R-24-087, authorizing the sale of the surplus property. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend final passage.
Okay. Any comment from members of the committee on this? All, Director Cummings?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this one does need just a little conversation to ensure that everyone understands what this is. This is a belt and suspenders approach that I believe that the legal team here in the city, as well as some of the outside counsel, felt that was a good thing to do just to make sure we're in good working order. Essentially, there was already a piece of legislation and an agreement to approve a purchase and sale agreement for this land. But what was not explicit, but you could take by inference, was that the Board of Aldermen wanted to actually sell the surplus property, if you will. And so what this does is it just kind of cleans that up a little bit, makes it explicitly clear that yes, you not only did you approve the purchase and sale agreement, but you also want to sell this piece of land. So it is a minor distinction, but it's one I want to make clear for you all, and that's why we would like you to favorably recommend this piece of legislation this evening.
Crossing the Ts and dotting the Is.
That's correct.
I like belt and suspenders. You're guaranteed, no embarrassments. Yes. Okay. Further discussion, members of the committee? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
R-24-088, authorize issuance of wastewater service permits upon incremental payment of sewer entrance charge assessments, redevelopment of land in the Veterans Memorial Parkway redevelopment, VMPR overlay district. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend final passage.
Discussion on the motion? Seeing none? All those in favor, call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. New business ordinances.
O-24-033, updating the ordinances relative to school safety zones and school zone flashing speeding limit signs. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend final passage.
Okay. Open it up for discussion by members of the board. Alderman
A
Dowd.
real brief explanation, when I had the city traffic engineer looking at the school zones for the new McCarthy School, as they went through the legislation, they found that there were a couple of areas that are associated with the McCarthy School, but they also found other areas from other schools that they needed to specifically designate the school safety zone. That's what this legislation does.
And if I can commend you, Alderman Dowd, I mean, when we were all kids, we had, I'm not dating that old.
I was going to say, did they have cars then?
But we all had, some mother that put on the crossing guard uniform and had the little stop sign and went out there. Well, it's not happening. Although we have the opportunity. So we have to come up with the next best thing. If our children are our future, let's guarantee their safety. And I think that is the key here. And if we have to do it electronically, it's not the best answer. I like the little lady with the stop sign myself, because if it went through her, she threw it at you, but, But let's try electronic, and I think I commend you for doing this, because safety is paramount to me. Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call call the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're not going to touch what's tabled in committee. General discussion. We'll start with Alderman Dowd.
No, the general's left.
You're done? Okay. What about the admirals?
Yeah. Nothing.
Okay. Alderman Thibodeau, do you have a comment or anything?
I do not.
Okay, I like that even better. And Alderman
No,
Clay.
I'm
And
done.
I will remain equally as silent. Okay. Public comment? We sure know how to empty out a hall. Nobody is here, so we'll skip over that. Remarks from Alderman. I don't know, it seems redundancy. Yes.
Redundant.
I know.
General discussion and remarks by Alderman. So if we're without objections, we'll skip over that. And the most important,
Alderman Dowd wants to make a
yes,
Motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn. And I'll call the meeting at 8:45.
You gotta vote on it
You
first.
gotta vote, yes.
Oh, yes, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And we're still at 8:45, so, okay. All right, again, thank you all for coming.